Maggie Dimmick. I'm the Associate Curator with the Olana Partnership, and I'll have the pleasure of introducing our speakers. And I'll say this is a program we've been looking forward to. We get asked so often by visitors, what happens to an artwork when it goes on loan, when it undergoes conservation work. I think those of us who are in the audience today, who are very familiar with Olana, will be familiar with the painting that we'll be discussing today. This is Thomas Cole's A Solitary Lake in New Hampshire. And you may have noticed that it's been absent from its typical place in the East Parlor of the main house for the last several months. And of course, that's because it has been out on loan as part of this great exhibition, Native Prospects. So I'll let Elizabeth and Lauren speak more about all of that. But first, I'll say a little bit about both of them. I'll begin with Elizabeth. So Elizabeth Robson is the paintings conservator for New York State's Bureau of Historic Sites. She received a master's degree and certificate of advanced study in art conservation from SUNY Buffalo State University, as well as bachelor degrees in art history and French literature from Colgate University. She's completed internships and fellowships at institutions such as the St. Louis Art Museum, Colonial Williamsburg, the Chrysler Museum of Art, and the John and Mabel Ringling Museum of Art, as well as abroad and at the International Platform for Art Research and Conservation in Brussels, Belgium. We'll also be hearing from Lauren Ross, who is the conservator of frames and gilded objects for New York State's Bureau of Historic Site. Lauren has over 25 years of experience working with museum collections. Before joining the Bureau in 2022, she previously worked at the Baltimore Museum of Art for 22 years. Ross is a bench-trained conservator, and throughout her career, she's received and continues to participate in specialized trainings on a wide variety of topics in recognized conservation programs and workshops, both domestic and international. Lauren is also very interested in promoting scholarship around frames, especially those made by or designed for artists, whether antique or contemporary. So please join me in welcoming Elizabeth and Lauren. We're so pleased to have you, and please take it away.
Great, thank you so much, Maggie. Just going to share. Does that look all right? All right, thank you, Maggie, for this opportunity from all of you to speak about our work on this incredible painting and frame. We're really excited to give you all a behind-the-scenes look at some of what goes into transporting and loaning collections objects like this one. And we have a lot to say about this project, and we want to leave plenty of time for questions. So we're going to jump right in. Just to introduce a little bit more about the Bureau that we work for, the Bureau of Historic Sites is located on Peoples Island, which is north of Albany. And we're in a historic textile factory complex pictured on the right. And the Bureau comprises several different units, including ourselves in conservation, but we also have a curatorial unit, collections managers, an exhibits team, and an interpretation team. And they all play vital and interconnected roles, and we collaborate a lot on various projects. And we work with and support all of the state-owned historic sites and parks that have historic collections objects across all of New York State, Olana being one of them. And within the conservation unit, we have 7 different specialties you can see listed there. Sometimes our projects do involve both or require collaboration, as not all objects fit neatly into one category, or they can have multiple joined parts, such as framed paintings. The image on the left shows the paintings lab, but each specialty has its own tailored space where work gets done. And one important thing that we do, of course, is support loan requests for the state's collections to be included in exhibitions by institutions both across and outside of New York State. And this promotes greater access and understanding of art and history. And Olana's collections are particularly active in this regard due to the popularity of Frederic Church as one of the preeminent Hudson River School artists. So when the opportunity recently came up for us to work with the site just across the river, where his well-known teacher Thomas Cole lived and worked, to present one of the large Cole paintings that Frederic Church owned, it was very exciting for us.
So in addition to normal loan considerations for conservators for our work, so when we're lending, we think about condition. But in this case, the painting's inclusion in the exhibition was a really important consideration for our agency as it promoted further exploration into the role or exclusion of indigenous populations and Native American figural representation in 19th century landscape painting by artists like Cole and his student Frederic Church. So naturally, this painting's inclusion in the exhibition promotes the visibility and accessibility of the state's collections, but also in this particular case, its inclusion was deeply aligned with New York State Parks' Our Whole History initiative, which was launched in 2020. Native Prospects, the exhibition fostered a greater understanding of the complex legacy of earlier landscape artists and prevailing attitudes and political policies of their time counterposed with contemporary practicing Indigenous artists.
So just to give you kind of a sense of what goes into the whole decision-making process and the timeline of a loan, this is a lot of steps listed here, but just to kind of illustrate the overwhelming amount of work that has to happen before treatment can begin and before a loan can begin. So this timeline was very intense. It was also ever-changing. But we really needed the time to assess the stability of both the painting and the frame, which had not left Olana in many years before we could approve the loan. And this all started back in January of 2023 when we received the loan request from the Thomas Cole National Historic Site. And there was almost a year and a half of work leading up to the opening of the exhibition at the first venue. And you can see that we collaborated with various staff within our bureau, as well as at Olana, at TOP, outside contractors, and of course, staff from each individual venue over the course of the project.
And I would add that this kind of timeline is pretty typical for works of art that are being requested for loan at institutions. But what is different here is that we are working for a state government, and there are lots of considerations that might not be sort of obvious to someone who's working at a private institution. Each leg of our travel as couriers had to have independent executive council approval, and there was a lot of paperwork. So we have to recognize that that sort of process is actually a really embedded process in making loans as state workers and also for the state collection. Elizabeth and I also wanted to be careful about creating a contingency plan for this artwork because we did have concerns over its condition and the extent of its travel. It had not left Olana's East Parlor for a long time, as Elizabeth mentioned, and we wanted to be very careful and deliberate about making sure it was safe to travel to each venue.
So this is a map showing the locations of all of the venues that were proposed for this exhibition and where the painting eventually traveled across New England. So it started at Olana, represented by the green star. It did travel up to Peoples Island for treatment and then back down, again, just across the river to the Thomas Cole site, then out to Connecticut to the Florence Griswold Museum, up to Maine at the Farnsworth Art Museum, and eventually back to Peoples Island. And of course, these journeys themselves were longer than these straight lines would indicate, as we did travel by truck. Sometimes we were in the art shipment truck itself, or sometimes we were in a follow car. So again, what all did it take to make this enormous undertaking happen?
Okay, so as I mentioned before, we believe that Solitary Lake had not left its place in the East Parlor at Olana, and it was installed between two parlor doors, which open inward toward the painting, so you can kind of see that shadow effect on the left image. That is the shadow of a door. One of the first things we had to do was to examine the painting in situ and its frame and to determine how might it be possible to create this kind of object. So we contracted with a private art handling firm to create a custom double crate. So the painting and its frame would be installed inside a travel frame that was an inner crate, and then that inner crate would be slotted into an outer crate. So we assist with the deinstall of heavy framed paintings, but we work with art handlers for such a large picture as this. And one of the things that we did were to install some special hardware on the reverse of the frame. Some of you may be familiar with them. They are called Oz clips. And the Oz clips are installed on the reverse of the block construction of this frame and kind of allow the painting to float within its interior crate, I mean. And it locks the painting in place so that it can't shift from left to right. And in this way also protects the frame from any kind of damages through contact. There are some protruding ornaments, and I wanted to be very careful about protecting those during transit. So the interior open travel frame is on the left, and then you see a little image of the Oz clips. And there is the lidded interior crate on your right. And here, if we can advance to the next slide, we have the inner crate with its lid. You can sort of see the translucent backings there, and behind that is the reverse of the painting. And then the exterior crate is shown in the court hall of Olana, and then it gets loaded onto a truck, which has features air ride and climate control. And then on the right, you're seeing our factory complex here at Peebles Island, and the crate is strapped inside, and then we're receiving it onto our loading dock. And Elizabeth is now going to discuss the conservation assessment and the treatment of the painting before our load.
Yeah, so once we successfully got the piece to Peebles Island, we started with documenting the framed painting in its current state, which is a typical step of all of our conservation treatments to start out. It's very important to document the state of the work and to document how it was previously framed, both the front and the reverse as well. You can see the current or the old framing package, which includes an acidic foam core backing board that was probably added in the 1980s. I also documented the painting on its own after we unframed it, and then created a treatment proposal with an estimated amount of time. I estimated at least over 100 hours would be required for this treatment. And this was approved by both a BHS curator as well as the site director at Olana before we proceeded with the treatment. My biggest concern before the loan were structural issues that I noticed. This painting has been trimmed and lined to an additional piece of canvas, we believe quite early in its life. So that lining is quite old and has begun to break down and split apart or even fall off in the corners, as you can see here. So I needed to create a better way to support the corners and prevent any further loss or slumping of the canvas or damage during the many legs of travel that would be involved in this loan. So I added some tabs of a non-woven material that I did tone with watercolor to not be quite so different from the edge of the painting. And I attached them using a heat set adhesive behind the lining canvas and then back onto the back of the stretcher. This is a strong heat set adhesive that's easily reversible for future retreatment, as I already knew that more work would needed to be done on this painting after the loan, and more to come on that later. And I used the same type of adhesive film to fit under areas of lifting canvas on the back, as you can see in the image on the right, again, to just prevent any further loss or tearing of this canvas. One of the ethical questions that I mulled over with this treatment was whether to remove the current varnish layer, which is apparent here in an ultraviolet light image. I could tell with some testing that the varnish had certainly aged and yellowed a bit and was obscuring the original colors that Cole had painted. However, I felt that there was likely not enough time before the loan start date for this level of treatment, which is a very intense and time-consuming process. It would involve removing past retouching as well, which are many of the dark areas seen in UV, especially along the entire top edge and the scattered areas throughout the rest of the composition. So after discussions with the Thomas Cole National Historic Site curators, who were not overly disturbed by the coloration of the painting, I instead proceeded just with the surface cleaning to remove any dirt and grime using hand-rolled cotton swabs, as you can see on the right, in order to have a fresh, clean surface on which to apply a fresh coat of varnish to improve the overall saturation and readability of the painting. And this still leaves the option to undertake additional treatment at a later date. So I conducted varnishing tests along one edge to see which combination of resin, solvent, and any additives would saturate the painting the best. We mix up all of our own recipes of varnish rather than using proprietary products so that we have control over all of these factors and can ensure reversibility and uniformity in our varnishing. And I applied this by brush. You can see the painting staged on an easel in a spray booth on the right. So that is for safety to prevent any solvent exposure. We do that in a spray booth, and I also wore a respirator. There was one rather large scratch where paint was missing from an upper corner. So I filled and textured this area with a water-based material and in-painted or added paint only where original paint had been lost using pigments bound in a synthetic resin. And these are reversible. This is a reversible material that will not shift in color over time. And so here's the painting overall before treatment, as well as the detail of the indigenous figure, followed by how it looked just after varnishing. After adding some fills to scattered other paint losses, those are the white spots that you see. And finally, after treatment, where those losses have all been color matched and in-painted. And so now Lauren will discuss the quite more substantial treatment that was required on the frame before this loan could take place.
Okay, so here is a view of the frame, which we presume to be original to the painting at the left before treatment. And I think you can see there's a fairly heavy grime layer present, especially visible along the bottom edge. And at the right, you can see an image of the reverse, again with that acidic backing board, and you can see the block construction of the frame. The inset is the plaque, which shows how difficult and unreadable, really, the artist title and name was at this point. And here are some images of some of the structural work that I had to do in my lab. And on the left, what you're seeing is a series of different kinds of clamps, which I'm using to try to resecure a lot of the loose ornament. There was some intense movement of a lot of the ornament, including the corners where there was severe gapping happening at the miters, and the lamb's tongue ornament along the side edge was barely hanging on in certain places. So I did a series of structural repairs like this, and also consolidation efforts. And then I was able to undertake cleaning, which you're seeing on the right is basically the bottom rail is half cleaned. And the cleaning often revealed that there were further areas of instability and flaking. And so more consolidation would be taking place. And so in this way, my treatment was somewhat dovetailed, and it wasn't very linear. So I had to do some consolidation and then undertake cleaning and then sometimes reconsolidate. So for those conservators who are on the call, I used a tailored aqueous solution using the modular cleaning program for this treatment. And I use some sponges to sort of pounce off the dirt on the sanded freeze areas of the OG molding. And this is a view on the left of the proper right lower corner before treatment. So you can see that wood is exposed. There is the original gesso material shown there. And then during treatment, I had taken castings of extant ornament, and I created a recipe of a traditional compo material. And sometimes that compo material is more formally referred to as plastic composition. So what is optimal about that material is that it is flexible when it's heated, thus the word plastic. So ideally, I think they mean thermoplastic. And it's able to be trimmed and manipulated to fit into the voids that were left on the frame. And then these positives that I created were then clamped into place and they were allowed to set. This recipe I made created for a very strong ornament once it was set, which is a really important consideration for how much these ornaments do protrude. They stand proud of the base molding. And as a side note, I just wanted to say that here at the Bureau, we do retain frame fragments. So there is a number of fragments in our collection, and whenever possible, I do like to reunite those fragments with the frame, but in this case, unfortunately, we did not have any fragments for this frame. Okay, so that's the same corner, but viewed from the side. So you can tell that the large portions of that sculptured ornament on the left are made out of compo, and you can tell that because of its beige color. And then what you're seeing underneath that is a gesso layer that's been incised. And then on the right, what you see is an area of reddish, that's an oil preparation for receiving the later applied sand. And I hope that you can see that there are faint cross-hatching marks there. So the cross-hatched gesso ground would have been cut into with a knife, like a recutting knife, sometimes referred to as a repaireur knife. And like the one that's shown here, these lines were incised presumably over the entire body of this profile, considering the fact that they're seen under the sand. It seems like a lot of work for someone to incise that many lines only to have them later covered over with sand. So our thinking is that the sand on the frame is not original and was added later in the life of this frame. And perhaps even Frederic Church himself may have requested the addition of sand when this painting was sent to a restorer in the late 1800s. So a bit about sand. Sand featured as ground decoration on American frames was typically fashionable beginning around the 1840s, and especially for Hudson River School painters. But sanded friezes sort of repose areas between larger scale ornament and interior ornament are sometimes found much earlier in European frames, such as the one on the right. And the coal frame that I worked on had a very heavy sand application, which is somewhat unusual for an artist in America in the 1830s. The sand may have been added to hide imperfections in our frame, but that can also happen with a number of other frames. So on the left, you're seeing an example of a frame by William Merritt Chase, or I should say, the painting by William Merritt Chase, and the maker is unknown. And within that, those dotted lines, you're going to see a very heavy sand element, and that at this point, those sand elements are actually pebbles. So another aspect of ethical considerations for the treatment is First of all, I would not have attempted to remove any of the sand because it has become such a part of the frame's character, and has been with it for a very long time. But some other things that have come up are things like that are aesthetically disturbing. There was a paper label on the vertical rail on the side, and it would have been highly visible in a museum context, and maybe less so in the shadowed interior of Olana's East Parlor. But in this case, there's no information really left on that label, and so it isn't really serving much purpose. So in this case, photo documentation is the stand-in, and I opted to remove that label in consultation with our curators. Additionally, there was a modern applied accession number and an old inventory number that was painted on the bottom of the frame, which you're seeing on the bottom right there. And after discussion with the curator again, and also our collections management unit, we opted to have me remove those, which are, probably not going to be that visible to the public who aren't looking underneath the frame often, but instead it's more appropriate to have our accession number applied to the reverse of the frame. And so I did go ahead and remove that. And on the top, you can see that same rail where the numbers have been removed. So in the image on the left, the cleaning efforts are still underway, and I have begun to do the loss compensations, which are all those white areas you see. And I also wanted to share again the detail of the plaque along the bottom, because it really improved after treatment. The plaque was barely visible and certainly dirty, but it was also really sensitive to water. I wanted to strengthen the legibility of that artist's title and dates in a reversible way so that you can hopefully now read it better, that it says Solitary Lake in New Hampshire by Thomas Cole, 1830. Again, and also the lamb's tongue ornament that you're seeing on the right in that detail certainly is much more readable than it was on the left before cleaning when it's embedded in dust and grime. Okay, and once again, here is the Solitary Lake painting in its frame before treatment. And this is a view of it in after treatment. The cleaning of both the painting and the frame are meant to be sympathetic. So the painting and the frame's conservator, Elizabeth and I work very closely together and also very collaboratively. The intention originally with the painting was not to display the painting in a grim and dusty molding for a loan. The painting and frame are now, we feel, much more prominent and easier to read, as I mentioned, and more powerful in their previous context before treatment. We definitely had to spend a lot of time to carefully situate the painting in its frame. The stretcher for this painting was barely larger than the sight edge opening, which means you could, if framed improperly, you might have been able to see light passing through the edges. And there was also a very strong possibility that the painting could shift in transit with that much of a gap around the perimeter. And so we spent about a day kind of creating buffers around the perimeter of the painting and to help lock it in place. But then we also ended up using brass mending plates and screwed those directly into the reverse of that stretcher and locked it into the frame. And we generally try to use existing holes whenever we can, because the idea is not to put a lot of extra holes in original stretchers, but in this case, it was kind of necessary to make sure that it didn't shift for its protection. My treatment for this frame, Elizabeth mentioned hours. So before I undertook the treatment, I submitted estimate hours for it, and it was around 200. And then by the end of it, I reached around 279 hours for the treatment. And I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth. Our painting was now ready for loan.
So from there, the transit from Peebles Island to the Thomas Cole National Historic Site was relatively simple and only about an hour apart, with the exception of this curved, rough gravel drive at the site seen on the left, which is a consideration when it comes to moving, especially large crates like this one that can't be hand carried, and wanting to minimize any vibrations for the artwork. So this is just one of the challenges that we face when transporting collections to locations where modern road services are not available or would be inappropriate, in fact, in the historic settings. But we persevered. We got it into their lovely studio building and participated in the installation of this painting along with a contracted art installer. And here are some views of the final Native Prospects installation at the Thomas Cole National Historic Site, showing several 19th century paintings alongside some lovely modern works from Native American artists that also respond to ideas about landscape. In October of 2024, we returned for the deinstallation, following which I rode with the painting to the Florence Griswold Museum in Connecticut as the courier, which is a role often assigned to a staff member of the lending institution when necessary. We don't send couriers with each and every loan, but with a piece this large, important, and fragile, it was a necessity. So this is showing some of shots of the trip and the install at the Florence Griswold. Part of the difficulty, again, in coordinating these courier trips is that we need to give the piece at least 24 hours to acclimatize to the new environmental conditions while keeping it in the crate, which dampens any quick changes in temperature or relative humidity. And this means that these trips often involve at least 2 days away from home, staying overnight near the venue, and then coordinating a trip back. And all costs are covered by the borrowing institutions. So once the piece has acclimatized, the courier is then involved with the unpacking and will perform condition checks, referencing images taken before the loan and noting any changes at all in the appearance of the piece. We then work with art handlers, whether outside hires by the venue or part of their own staff, to safely install the piece on the wall. And we also have to coordinate carefully with each venue, which has its own timelines for preparing and painting gallery spaces, as well as installing the rest of the exhibition. And then these images show the final venue for Native Prospects at the Farnsworth Art Museum in Maine and illustrate some additional challenges which can come up during loan travel, like pathing, how to get the painting from the truck on the street level to this upper level gallery space pictured in the center. So there was a ramp into the museum and an elevator, but we did have to, coordinate and double check in advance to be sure that both could accommodate such a large crate for this painting. Also, depending on the time of year, weather can factor into our plans and our scheduling. And security is, of course, very important to think about during transit and during the exhibition. Of course, trucks and crates are never left unattended or unsecured. And so with conservators serving as couriers on each leg of the loan for this large, complex object, this really was able to help alleviate the fear of any unforeseen problems and allowed us to proceed with this loan. We did end up reserving the right to recall or end the loan if any problems were encountered during any of the legs, but luckily that was not the case, and there were successful installations, deinstallations, and transits in every case. So now the painting and the frame are back at Peebles Island. They're currently both in the paintings lab and undergoing a new round of documentation and proposals in order to begin phase 2 of treatments, which we would love to speak to you about more, but we want to leave time for other questions as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Lauren. That was incredible, and I love seeing all of the behind the scenes, especially in all of the transit and installation. I think that many people would be surprised at all of the steps involved, even after all of the complications of the actual treatment itself.
Mm.
So we've got a few questions that have come in from our audience, but I think, along those lines, we have had a few folks who are curious about what a phase 2 treatment will involve, now that the painting is back at Peebles Island before it returns to Olana. So maybe you could go ahead
Sure.
and tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, let's jump ahead. We have prepared some additional slides just to get into that. I'll start with the painting itself, which will undergo further both aesthetic and structural treatment, as well as more research and analysis, which we've done a bit of. Lauren has a lot to say about, it's the history and the frame and the background, but there's more to learn. There's more to discover here. So in terms of aesthetic treatment, that would involve complete varnish removal, and then replacement with a non-yellowing varnish and retouching of losses. So you can see a little detail area where we've just begun to clean up a section of the sky and show really a big difference in the coloration. Structural treatment will involve further strengthening of the structure of this piece. It may, in fact, involve a complete removal of the current lining and replacement. And this will be undertaken alongside a graduate intern that we're lucky enough to have in the paintings lab for the year, and will require a lot of testing to determine what the most appropriate materials and methods will be for that. So again, just the idea of re-supporting and protecting the painting for the next 100 to 200 years of its life back at Olana. And then with the research and analysis, we're hoping to do pigment ID to discover more about the current lining recipe. And also we've already undertaken some infrared imaging. So you can see here a nice shot using our brand new infrared camera, which is able to see through paint layers at times, depending on how those different pigments interact with the infrared portion of the spectrum. And one area, if you kind of compare to the normal light here, one area that we found particularly interesting is right here in front of the canoe. So we see a kind of odd blob that is not present in the normal light. So this is something we'll be looking into further with other techniques, and just seeing what we can find about the history of this painting, its canvas, potentially being a reused canvas, and Cole's kind of choices as he created this painting. And Lauren, if you want to talk about the frame.
Sure, thank you. In terms of phase 2 for a treatment for the frame, there was definitely a compressed deadline for the treatment overall. And so one of my ethical considerations had to be to sacrifice the treatment of the top edge of the frame, which is something I've never done before. And in this case, the feeling was there was so much embedded grime present on the top rail, but also a tremendous amount of overpainting on some of the top rail ornament, that I would not have had time to complete that treatment before the loan happened. And basically the top of the frame is not visible to a viewer in an installation context. You could see it maybe if you were on a ladder, but what I had to opt to do was to just make sure that that rail, the top of that rail, was as stable and clean as it could be before letting it go. So I did do consolidation along the rail and did some fills, as you can see. But there was no way I was going to be able to deal with all of the grime there. So phase 2 is definitely going to be to work on that fourth rail and conducting some testing to see what is the best method to remove some of this grime and overpaint. And I'll be doing some additional recasting and replacement of ornament. And then because I now have the frame back in our possession, if I wanted to go back and refine any of my in-gilded areas, I could do that as well. I would really like to conduct sampling of the sand to see if we can identify the source of that sand. And I also very much look forward to doing more research about the history of this frame and its provenance. So that's my next steps, alongside also with our graduate intern.
That's fascinating. It must be such a great opportunity to have a piece. Not only, I mean, not only is it an opportunity for a piece like this and its frame and the painting to receive so much attention because of its request on an exhibition, but um, not only do other people get to see it, but then, you know, when it does come back to the main house at Olana, it'll be so much better for it. So it's, I have to say thank you to both of you for the work that you're doing and being able to talk about it like this. And now I do have, there are several questions we've gotten, so I'm going to start sharing some questions from the audience. And I like this one because it's very straightforward. David Lucas is asking, how much does this framed piece weigh and how is it secured to the walls at the borrowing institutions?
Excellent question.
We actually weighed it.
We did weigh it.
Yes,
I
we
want
did.
to
And I
say,
believe that 65 to 70 pounds, was that
yeah,
correct?
that's what I was gonna say. Yeah, it's
Wow.
it maybe not as much as you might expect.
Right.
The kind of the block construction of the frame, I would assume, helps with the kind of cutout. It's not a solid chunk of wood.
That is correct, for sure.
Yeah.
Also, the type of wood that it's made from makes a big
Hmm.
difference. This is pine. And so other types of frames that are made out of oak or other woods, I mean, could be tremendously heavier. But yeah, Elizabeth, you're right. Like the block construction makes a huge difference in
Hmm.
minimizing the weight. But then I guess
Can kind
the
of see
way the
that. Yeah.
stretcher is made too.
Yeah, definitely. And then in terms of how it's secured, it did vary in terms of the specific sorts of hardware that each institution used. But they were all different types of hangers that had, limits much higher than 75 pounds. We always err on the side of caution, and we use what are called D-rings on the stretcher itself, or on the back of the frame itself, in terms of securing. Or I guess we were at that point using the Oz clips still.
We
So
did. We
it's
did use the
the
Oz clips.
the Oz clips have kind of the ones that are in. Let me see if I can go to the picture of the back.
Like
Do
a
we have that?
triangular hanger.
Yeah, so the ones at the top third on the sides have a little hanging loop. And so that is how it both is secured in the frame and then, or in the travel frame, and then how it is hung.
And I believe we're going to we're going to leave the Oz clips in place.
I think that's
They
best,
will
yeah.
now be the preferred hanging method in perpetuity.
Mhm.
Well, I'll go ahead and bring in another question. This is from Karen. And so I know in one of your photographs that you were sharing of the initial sort of pre-treatment examination, you had the painting down here in the East Parlor in the main house. Karen is asking, how typical is that? Do you often examine something on site, an artwork on site, or is it preferable to bring it to the studio for those
Mm.
preliminary loan exams?
I'll say that in this case, not knowing how much the painting weighed, it's a very large painting. I think with
Mhm.
its frame, it is about 75 inches wide.
Mhm.
We wouldn't even be able to transport that kind of size picture to People's Island Labs without the whole process of getting a request for quotation for the crate itself. We would never undertake to move a painting like this. And in fact, when we did crate it, both Elizabeth and I did have to do some like preliminary kind of surface treatments so that we could remove some dust, but also I did some consolidation on the frame before it could even go in the crate, because there was such intense instability. So, you know, we do like to examine things in our labs, but in a case, and we did examine, of course, before agreeing to lend it. But in a case like this, we sort of have to examine things in situ when there are so many unknowns.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, it's a combination, at least to start with, examining in situ to see what's possible when it comes to moving it. And then, of course, there's much of the painting that's not visible when it's framed. So needing to get it to the labs to separate the parts, documenting first, and then separating the two pieces so that we can get a full sense of the condition and then how to proceed is very important.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to shift gears a little bit here because it seems as though obviously there were a lot of considerations for this particular painting. What could either of you or both of you speak about what was in your career, in your experience, the most challenging work that you've ever been presented with to restore, and what made it so challenging?
That's a really tough question.
That's tough.
I think this treatment was one of my most challenging.
Mm.
To be honest, I mean, it's very large, and trying to accommodate the scale of this treatment in the time frame that we had,
Mm.
alongside all of the other responsibilities that we are tasked with, was very challenging.
Mm.
I did work on a microclimate for a shaped Italian panel painting a long time ago, and that was quite difficult. So I'd say that would be my second most difficult treatment.
Mhm. Lauren, maybe could you explain for some of our audience what you mean when you said you worked on a microclimate?
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. So you've seen shaped icon paintings, I'm sure, like polyptychs, diptychs. In my previous life, we were the institution I worked for, which at that time was the Baltimore Museum of Art. We lent an Italian panel painting, excuse me, that had an engaged frame, but we did not feel comfortable with the condition that it was in to let it travel without a microclimate environment around it. And sometimes a painting's conservator will suggest that a painting can be placed in a microclimate, but in this case, it had what's known as an engaged frame, so the frame is actually part of the painting. And I had to work with one of my cabinet maker colleagues to create a shaped panel painting microclimate frame to place over this. And the topography of that panel was very uneven. So it meant like creating sort of spacers to make sure that it didn't damage the frame while it was in transit, that would allow for a minimum of movement, but not too much pressure, but also to create an environment. Mostly the microclimate aspect is to create an environment that stabilizes the relative humidity, so that it doesn't experience tremendous fluctuations when it's in transit. And a lot of that kind of fluctuation actually can happen on the airplane itself. So we do send paintings in microclimates when it's necessary. Anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Elizabeth, I want to give you a chance to answer that same question if you're up for it.
Sure. Yeah, I was just thinking back. I think some of the most challenging treatments I've come across have to do with when a piece does undergo varnish removal, and then, as I mentioned, that often includes removing overpaint that's been added in past treatments, and sometimes that can be applied incredibly thickly and covering perfectly good original paint. And so really, I'm recalling a particular treatment at a previous institution with very thick overpaint, kind of totally changing the composition of the background, and having to use a lot of chemistry to work through various solutions and try to find a safe way to separate those layers from the original paint, which fortunately was possible, but did take a good amount of testing and then a good amount of just really detailed, careful work, working under a microscope, kind of inch by inch sort of thing. So that's what I would respond.
Yeah, well, we're lucky that the two of you are doing this kind of work, maybe rather than some of the rest of us. It sounds like it's so, so detailed. Um, I want to get to another question here. This one is from Ricky. And Ricky asks an interesting question. I know, Lauren, I think you had invoked some knowledge of a previous 19th century restoration of the frame on this piece, but Ricky is asking whether there's any evidence that this painting itself or its frame had been modified more recently. For example, in the 1960s, when there was a risk of Olana being sold by descendants of Church.
I could start.
Mhm.
I think fortunately this is one of the paintings that does not seem to have gone to an outside restorer in the 1960s, which is incredibly fortunate that we still have this original stretcher and the lining, even though it is, as I said, aging. It likely at that time could have been removed and possibly replaced with something inappropriate or damaging to this piece. So I think we're pretty fortunate that this one kind of escaped that round of treatment.
Yeah, I would agree. I presumed that the painting hadn't been off the wall in a very long time, but I was not aware of 1960s. I mean, I guess in any case, what I can say is that we do review treatment histories for the objects, and we did not uncover any information about any kind of treatment that took place.
Mm-hmm. And I'll clarify for some folks in our audience, part of, I think, the basis for Ricky's question to that end is we are aware, I think, as Elizabeth had alluded to, that there are other pieces, other artworks, paintings, and frames within the main house at Olana that were treated or otherwise, modified in that period between when the house and the landscape here were private property and when it became a state historic site. So folks, we are coming up on 1 o'clock. We have about 5 more minutes until 1. I think that we'll probably have time to fit in maybe 1, maybe 2 more questions. So I think I'll give you one that I see as being really interesting here. This is from Susie. And Susie is asking if you can go into more detail about the use of historical pigments this is for you, Elizabeth, I think, although Lauren, it may be to some extent for you. How do you determine what is actually there, on, for example, the canvas itself? Where do you source your pigments? And do you use pigment powder and make your own paint, or are you using commercially available material? Maybe you can talk a bit more about that.
Sure. Yeah. A lot of questions there. So when I'll start with what we actually use. For our paints, it does vary a little bit, but I tend to use a mixture of pigments that are pre-ground in a resin that is stable and reversible. It's not anything like an oil paint or an acrylic paint or really any paint that you've probably worked with. It's has almost no body to it. It's only color essentially, and it does. So that's why I have to take the step of adding a fill material first that creates the texture and the leveling any loss to the surface, and then adding this what we call in painting material. So the pigments are sourced from various locations, and the paints when they're pre-mixed. Kramer, Gamblin, Golden are some of the companies that we work with. And at other times, I have mixed dry pigments with different binders. I'm working on a treatment now where I'm mixing it into a very matte binder that's actually made from a seaweed called Finori. And so that is kind of custom done right on the palette with raw pigments. And again, yeah, they sometimes mimic the historical pigments and sometimes don't. Obviously, we're much more aware now of health and safety concerns with various pigments. And so that is always taken into consideration to minimize any health and safety concerns for ourselves. And you're right, it's more about matching the color than the actual pigment, as long as the binder is there and is reversible. But we can go further with our analysis, which we hope to do in this next phase of treatment to identify the pigments used by Thomas Cole. One of the techniques we can use for that is X-ray fluorescence, which can pick up the presence of heavy metals that are often used in particular pigments in the past. So we'll be doing some of that. Lauren, did you have anything to add on this subject?
I mean, it's customary to mix dry pigments for toning purposes for gilding, but I think that was more of a paintings question. So
Mhm. Well, maybe I think we'll wrap up here. I will give one more question to the two of you, and it's one that I've heard myself from several of our visitors, and they're just wondering under what circumstances would it ever be possible, or is it ever possible to visit the conservation labs or other parts of People's Island?
That's a great question. I know that we are in preliminary discussions about eventually having open houses at People's Island again, which used to be common practice. Otherwise, I think a specific tour would have to be set up through our DHP colleagues that maybe we can give some information.
mhm.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I was going to say I'm sure that we will be sending a little follow-up to those who were able to join today. I think we'll leave it there since we're up at the end of our hour. But I just want to say, on behalf of the Olana Partnership, how much we really appreciate both you, Elizabeth, and you, Lauren, taking the time to talk through this with us. It was really, really informative for me, I would say too. And for those of you who are still on the call, still listening on the webinar, I just want to remind you that we do record these webinars, and there'll be a posting of a recording of this webinar available fairly soon on our website, olana.org, and on our YouTube page. So continue to check for that. If you're interested in any other future programs, if you visit olana.org/programs and events to find out about future talks and future webinars. But with all of that said, I just want to say thank you to spending time with us this afternoon, and thanks again, and we'll see you next time.